Recently on Twitter, I mentioned how I really like Laravel, but sometimes I just miss writing JavaScript and I'm not like a huge fan of PHP. And it's mostly just personal reasons. It's not that I don't like PHP. It's not that PHP doesn't get the job done or that JavaScript's better. Just that I've worked with JavaScript for so long that I'm very familiar with the syntax, and it's a lot easier for me to not have to think so much about little things when I'm just trying to write code. The things that bug me aren't like big deals, but there's just something about being familiar and comfortable with a language that you've worked with for a while and then having to work in a new language. And even though I love the framework of Laravel, I'm often asking myself like, oh man, I wish there was like a Laravel for JavaScript. Of course, when you post something on Twitter, everybody's going to come out of the woodwork telling you how you could try this or use this. And a lot of the times that's how I find new things to try out. That's how I found Laravel. And people keep mentioning AdonisJS. And I may have heard of it a couple times, but I never checked it out. So with all that said, for this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to check out Adonis and I'm just going to compare it to Laravel. I just kind of want to see if Adonis does sort of feel like a Laravel for JavaScript. A lot of the feedback that I got on Twitter about Adonis was that it's kind of getting inspiration from Laravel. It's obviously not going to be a one-to-one. Their ecosystem isn't as large as Laravel's ecosystem. It's also kind of new, so things like that take a lot of time to build. But they did draw a lot of inspiration from Laravel, and just looking at their documentation or their main landing page, I can see that some things already look familiar, and I just want to go through that now. Full disclosure, I'm not an expert in anything. I often feel that I am a very average developer, so I'm not going to claim to be an expert during this video or any future videos. I am not an expert in Laravel. I'm not an expert in JavaScript, but I have worked with some of these technologies. I have worked with TypeScript in the past because I've worked as an Angular developer for almost 3 years, and I've been working in Laravel for the last 6 months on my own personal projects. And I'm also not like very well versed in the MERN stack, although I have messed around with Node and Express in the past. I never worked in it professionally, so just take what I have to say with a grain of salt, because much of this is just going to be personal opinion and just me comparing two frameworks, one which I feel like I am fairly familiar with now, but not an expert in, and one that I am literally looking at for the first time right now. I'm going to pull up Laravel's documentation just to kind of see if I can compare things a little tiny bit, not in too deep of detail, but I am going to see if I can at least talk about like some of the basics that I see right off the bat and some of the familiarities between the two. Again, it's not going to be exactly the same because they are completely different frameworks and completely different languages, but I do want to be able to back up what I say when I'm like, oh, this does look kind of like what Laravel does. Right off the bat, I see their example of their routes here. And this is just on their landing page. Again, I'm not going into any detail yet, but I am going to spin up a getting started and look through the actual project itself in a second and, set up Adonis real quick on my local machine to just spin it up and do a hello world example. This is how you register routes in Adonis. And this looks very similar to how you set up a route in Laravel. You have the router, you have the type, then you have the URL name, you can pass it in a controller, and then I'm assuming that this is the name of the method that you're calling within the controller, which is very much exactly like what Laravel does. If you look at this here, you can see it's doing something exactly like what those examples on that page look like. Like the syntax is pretty similar. You've got JavaScript style syntax where you just have a single dot notation versus PHP syntax here for the class where you'd have the double colon notation, but you can see it's the same thing. You're kind of calling your route, the method type, and now you have the path that you want to give it. You call it the controller, and then you give it the method within the controller that you're referencing for this route. Same exact thing that's happening here. So then we have the create controller, and I see that Adonis is also doing something with having a CLI. I noticed that when I was kind of briefly looking through this. Here, it's very similar to the PHP Artisan CLI. Instead, you have node ace make controller post. And if you did this in Laravel, you would do PHP Artisan make controller post. So the CLI is similar too, which is nice. I like to see that. I'm definitely seeing the inspiration that Adonis has drawn from Laravel. And then I will say that it also seems like the boilerplate for a controller is very similar to the boilerplate that you have in Laravel. And of course, you can create whichever methods you want, but there are some default methods that will be created for you when you run the command in Laravel. And it seems like that's the same thing that's happening with the controller here. At least that's what I'm assuming, because this is the example code that they're providing us. But then you have your index method, you have your store method, and you have your show method. And then if you go back to the routes, you can see in the example, those are the methods that are being referenced here in the controller that's being passed in. And that's pretty much what's happening here. And if you go to Laravel and we go to controllers and we see some basic examples of controllers, you can see that PHP artisan make controller command here that's very similar to that node ace command that we just saw in Adonis. And then you can see here in the Laravel documentation, I don't see the boilerplate that's generated for when you run that create or make controller command. Dorian from the future here, as I was editing this, I realized that I really wanted to show the example and I didn't do it as I was recording. So I just ran the PHP artisan make controller command in Laravel, and you do have to flag it as a resource if you do want these empty boilerplate methods here. And you can see it looks a lot like the Adonis methods that they provide in their controller. So just wanted to throw that in there. Let's keep going. With the model here, we have a command to create a model, which is the same command, node ace, and then you have a make model with the name of the model that you want to create. Obviously, it's not going to look the same, but at a high level looking at this, I see that it's doing something very similar to what creating a model looks like in Laravel. You know, this is TypeScript and not PHP. We've got an ID, we've got a title, and we got contents, which is what makes up a post. And if you look at a model in Laravel, you're going to see some similarities there too. You see generating a model class. So you can see we have the PHP artisan make model command here. There are some extra modifiers that you can put into the command in Laravel that will make a migration, and you can do other things. When you create a model, you can pass in different options, and with those different options, you can do a lot of different stuff. Like you can make a factory, you can make a controller, you can make a migration, you can make all of those things. And I didn't see that in the quick example. Again, I'm not deep in the docs on the Adonis side. I just wanted to show the similarities. But then you can see that Eloquent uses a different structure for the models because it's a different programming language and it's a different ORM. So of course they're going to look different, but I do see a lot of the similarities here between these. And then we have a validator here where you can pass in a validator which uses Vine.js. It seems like these validators are used to validate the data that is being passed in to these model items and probably done to check before you save in the database. Laravel does have some of that same stuff built in. I don't remember having to ever install a package for that, but it seems like you would need to use Vine.js here if you want to use that validator within Adonis. And I think that just goes back to like the ecosystem and, you know, Laravel having a lot of the batteries included. It seems that they recommend Vine for Adonis. I don't know if you can use other packages. I'm assuming that you can, and maybe they give you that kind of flexibility where Laravel, I think you just kind of have to use the validation that Laravel provides. And I'm sure that there's other packages that Laravel provides, but there is a lot of stuff that just comes with Laravel. And here I'm noticing that the validator does require an import for this library. And in Laravel, I don't remember having to do that, but we'll just move on from validation because I feel like I'm getting too in the weeds over here. And I just want to keep going through this and then spin up a local project to check it out. And then it has a little section here where it says putting it all together, where you kind of see you have your model import up here, you have your validator import up here, and then it just seems like it's importing the HTTP package from Adonis core there. And then now you can see in this controller what that would look like when you kind of set up a real controller. I'm looking this over quickly, so hopefully I don't make any mistakes, but I see here that the index method just returns a page there, and it passes a query, and it says paginate page and pull in page 1, I'm guessing there. And then you have your store method here that is, you know, used to probably store data. And then we create a payload that is just a request, and then it uses the validator that we have here that's being passed in from this import in our validators that would have been created with that validator section there. And then we just validate that and then create that payload, which I'm assuming just saves to the database. And then we have our show method here, which finds or fails, which usually means it'll find the first one or fail. And we pass in the post ID there from the params that are being passed into this object here. And that's pretty straightforward. And I will say that it does have a very Laravel-ish feel. And I like what I see. Again, one of the big things that a lot of people were saying was just that the ecosystem isn't there yet. Like, it's a newer framework. It doesn't have mass adoption like Laravel. And other frameworks do, but it does seem like it's trying to do a lot of similar things. And here are just some of the things that they highlight about the core framework features. And you got your config management, it's type safe, environment variables, which is kind of nice. I like that. Then we have a thoughtful folder structure, which we'll look into that now. And we have some different things here like routing controller, middleware, body parser. And let's see if we can actually kind of go through some of that. I'm not going to keep going through the landing page because I just wanted to show some of those examples there, but it does seem like they have a lot of little snippets and things that we can look at here. And this looks like it's just covering test. And then we have their collection of officially maintained packages, which I know this isn't going to compare to Laravel. And I'm not trying to compare them apples to apples. Keep in mind when I say things like that, that it's not going to be exactly like Laravel, and it's going to be probably a different developer experience, and it's just not going to be as robust and have as big of a community and have a mature ecosystem like Laravel does, but it does seem like they are trying. And I see that they have their own ORM, which is called Lucid, and it's a SQL ORM. They do allow you to use other ORMs of your choice, because I know that you can use Prisma with Adonis. In this video, when I spin it up, I'm probably just going to stick with Lucid. They seem to have built-in authentication, which I hope that the getting started does cover that, because that's one of my favorite things about Laravel is that the authentication just works out of the box, and that's super nice. And it seems like they have some other things that are built in. Bouncer, which provides low-level API to build custom authorization workflows. FlyDrive, which provides an API to manage user-uploaded files on S3 buckets, and the local file system, which seems nice. I know that Laravel, especially when you're working in your local environment, you can just save images and you can save things right to the local folder and in the storage of the project, which maybe that's what FlyDrive allows us to do, and then allows us to integrate S3 buckets for when we want to save images or other things like that. We have API limiter, which protects our API from getting hit too hard or too often. We've got Edge, battery included template engine, Bento Cache, speed up your application. Vine.js is a type safe validation library. That's what we were seeing there in that example on the landing page. We've got some support for Ally to have some different login options here. You got internationalization, health checks, you got mailers, sends emails from your application. That's kind of nice. That's another thing that's usually a pain to have this set up, especially when you're working with stuff that's not like Laravel or other battery included frameworks. So it's nice to see that they have a mailer option there. Transmit, lock, Vite, and then we have Inertia. So it does use Inertia to connect your front end and back end there, which is kind of nice too, because Laravel does offer an Inertia option. As we all know, Inertia 2.0 is coming out soon, and Laravel is going to be using that in no time. I actually just saw a tweet that said that was coming real soon. That's pretty much the landing page. I do want to just go to the docs and just kind of spin this up real quick and see what it's like and see how it feels. So let's do that. Okay, so we're on the getting started page. First thing we need to do is check our node version to see if we are good to go. So let me open up my terminal. We'll do node-v there, and we are on 20.9. It says that we should be on greater than or equal to 20.6. So I'm good. I'm not going to update my node version to be on a more current version of node, because it doesn't seem like I need that for the sake of installing and running AdonisJS. So I'm just going to kind of move through this. It does say that if you are a visual learner, you can go and learn Adonis 6 at Adonicast. That's funny. So we got Adonicast for Adonis, and then you have Laracast for Laravel. It does seem like they really did like Laravel and just wanted to make one for TypeScript or JavaScript. Let me see. Do I need to install their CLI? I guess let me just move through this. So it doesn't seem like I need to install a separate CLI or anything, but I did see that they had that Node A CLI, and I don't see anything in the getting started about that. So let's just kind of go through it and see. So if we want to use a starter kit for our projects, we can go and choose between Web, API, Slim, or Inertia. Okay, so I may have misspoke earlier, and I guess you can choose whether or not to use Inertia. I would think you'd want to, but I don't know what their basic web looks like and what their view would look like. I kind of want to spin it up with Web and see what that looks like, and then I want to spin it up with Inertia and see what that looks like. But let's just keep moving through this. I'm sorry. So with the command, you can choose to add the kit. You can specify which DB you want. You can initiate a get repo. It defaults to false. And then you can also have the auth guards that you want to have set up with your package. So you can do basic auth, tokens or sessions. And here we go. Now we have our starter kits. So our starter kits serve as a starting point to create applications using Adonis. They come with an opinionated folder structure. Okay, I kind of like that. I like opinionated frameworks. I know that people don't like it, but I do. So the web starter kit is tailored for creating traditional server rendered web apps. Do not let the word traditional discourage you. We recommend the starter kit if you want to make a web app with limited front-end interactivity. The simplicity of rendering HTML on the server using Edge.js will boost your productivity, as you do not have to deal with complex build systems to render some HTML. Later on, you can use Hotwire, HTMX. I'm careful when you say HTMX, that guy with the horse face and laser eyes just shows up. He'll probably be in the comments now, and every CEO will show up too. And then it says that you can then use these and include Alpine.js. And that's kind of what Laravel does when you just spin up a basic Laravel application without using Inertia and just use the default Blade templates. It's just Blade is their server-side HTML and PHP. And it seems like Edge, which I don't really know about, offers that in JavaScript. So if you spun up the web starter kit, that's what you would be using. For the sake of this video, I might do that. I might just kind of go through this and go through the other options. I know what Inertia is. I'm guessing that the API starter kit allows you to create API servers. So the API starter kit seems to give you the option to just use Adonis as an API backend, and then you can create an API with it, and then you can use your front end with like React or Vue or whatever you want to consume your API data and display it on the front end. It says that the API kit will remove support for serving static files. It does not configure the view layers and Vite, and then it turns off XSS and CFRF protection, and it enables CORS protection. And it uses a content negotiation middleware to send HTTP responses in JSON. And then the Slim is for minimalist. It seems like that just comes with the core framework and defaults to folder structure, a bare bones version of Adonis without all the bells and whistles it says here. And then Inertia. Inertia is the way to build server-driven single-page applications. You can use your favorite front end like React, Vue, Solid, Svelte to build your front end of your application, or you can use the adapter flag to choose the front end framework you want to use. And then it says that you can also pass in a server-side rendering flag to turn on and off server-side rendering when you set up that starter pack. And then it seems like you're allowed to bring in your own starter pack too. So it seems like they give you a lot of flexibility here. For the sake of this demo, I'm just going to use the web setup that they have. I think that that's going to be more, I would say, I don't know, true to the framework. It's kind of like how with Laravel, I like to use Livewire and Blade and the tall stack, because that feels a little bit more like what you would expect to use the framework without using a separate front end. Even though if I were to use this, I would probably use it with Inertia, and I'm starting to kind of lean that direction with Laravel, because I'm kind of missing my front end frameworks, and I'm really enjoying Vue.js lately. So I'm kind of trying to, Goldilocks it and find just the right framework for me to procrastinate my building of ideas on. And that's why I end up going and learning new stuff, because I do enjoy the learning part. So let's just start this up. So first, let's go ahead and run our web command. So we're going to do this here. I wonder if you don't pass it in any flags, if you get any options in their project creation here. So test that out. I'm going to create a new one here, and it says I need to install the package of create Adonis. So we'll just say yes to that. Just running the command is going to let you choose from it in the command line, which is kind of nice, because then I don't have to pass in all the flags. Like I said, I wanted to just use the web starter kit for the sake of this video and to understand the folder structure a little bit. I know that there'll be some small changes there, but I don't think that it would be a big deal, because pretty much you'll just replace your view layer with the framework when you use Inertia, probably just how you do it in Laravel. I'm going to go with basic auth. I'm going to just keep it SQLite for simplicity so that I don't have to set up dev Postgres or MySQL on my local environment, because SQLite will just work and I don't have to like deal with setting that up. I usually start my projects off in Laravel with SQLite, and then I add Postgres more often than not later on if that actually becomes a real thing in a production application. But when I'm working in dev, I kind of just keep it SQLite because it gets up and running quick, and I don't have to mess around with setting up any databases. So I'll fast forward through this because this is going to take a while. All right, so it seems that our project has been successfully created. I will go ahead and open this up in VS Code and run it real quick to just see what that looks like and see what the file structure looks like. All right, so here we have our file structure. Let me zoom in a little bit. This might look a little funky, but I really want to be able to see all of this and share all of this because I want to kind of do my comparison to Laravel. So right off the bat, I will say that the file structure does feel very similar to a Laravel project. I almost want to open a Laravel project side by side and just show you what that looks like real quick. Let me open up one of my Laravel projects super quick. I'm going to put a Laravel project here. I'm just going to zoom into this a little bit so you can see it. All right, so this is a Laravel project, right? So you have your app directory, which has pretty much all the meat and potatoes from your project. That's where your models live. That's where your controllers live. That's where your live wire lives. That's where your services and your policies and everything that is important kind of lives in the app directory. And I will say that here, switching to Adonis, you can see that that's kind of similar. Now we have our models here, and it comes with the user model that's already built in there. And then we have our middleware here, which is already there. And you can kind of see that this is going to be very similar here in our app directory. Here we have our models, and then here are all the models that I have for this project. We have some similarities there already. And then back to the Adonis project, I'm going to close app directory. Then we have our config directory, which it's the same thing here in the Laravel project. We have our config directory with all of the different configuration files and whatnot in there, which is almost identical. Let's see what else. We have our database, which has our migrations and other database things that will probably end up living in here, like factories and seeders and things like that. This is a Laravel project. We have our database directory. We have our factories and migrations and seeders. And then I go back to Adonis, and that's what we have here. There's currently only the migrations directory within the database directory, but once you build that out and you start adding factories and seeders, I'm guessing that's where it's going to live. And then we have our resources. Man, this does look just like a Laravel project. You can see that we have our resources here in my Laravel project, and we have our CSS, JS, Markdown, and views. And then you go here to the Adonis project, and you have your resources directory, and you have your CSS, JavaScript, and views. And that's very, very, very similar. Again, I've never worked in Edge. It seems like VS Code isn't picking up the syntax highlighting for this Edge file here, but it just kind of looks like HTML. It's a little hard to see it because it's all white, and that's always hard to read. But if you look at it, it just looks like a big HTML file. The Vite imports here, this is common in Laravel too, to import your Vite resources here for your JavaScript and your CSS right in the head. Same thing as you do in Laravel. I'm sure that's just how you do it, but it's funny to see how similar it is. It really is very, very similar to Laravel. It feels like Laravel in JavaScript. Like it definitely feels like that. Then you have your test here, and you see you're also going to have your test here. And then do you have a routes directory? Where are your routes defined? Okay, that's interesting. It's not in the app. I would think that you would have your routes defined here, but I don't see them. But just comparing them side by side from a folder structure standpoint, I will say that there is so much similarity between the two and the way that the folder structure is in Adonis. So I'm just going to do npm run dev and fire this up real quick, and then just open that and see what the starter looks like. So let me just open that here, and there we're up and running. That's simple. my project is on my local environment, and it seems like we have this going. Now, I do want to kind of see how Auth is going to work, because I did choose the basic Auth, so I'm assuming that's going to be set up, and I just want to see if that just works super nice and easy and right out of the box like Laravel does. So we have our configuration here, and again, I'm just kind of going through this in real time. This is exactly how I learn, and I hope you guys like this. This is kind of just us hanging out. You're just along for the ride. I'm sorry if you thought that this was going to be something different, but I'm just trying to keep it casual. So here's using a config service or config files. And then, we can just set up our configs there, using a service versus importing the config files directly. Okay, which this is very similar to Laravel too, right? Like, so here's my Laravel project, and when you go to your configs, you can see you have like different configs that you give names for. So one that's very common is like the services, and then you kind of give the names to your services, so then you can reference these later on throughout your project, and you call like postmark or whatever you're using, right? Let's just say like you're using Google and you want to get the environment variable from something that has to do with Google for your authentication, and you just kind of do config dot Google dot client ID, and then it pulls in the client ID from your environment variable, so then you can like call those in your server files and just have that set up there, and it kind of keeps it clean, and it's a good way to be able to reference stuff. I'm seeing that this kind of feels very similar to that. See how you're kind of doing here, and this is Adonis, and the syntax is very similar to what it looks like in Laravel too. So you can kind of do a Boolean check here and check the condition, and if the config does have this app.url, then it will render this. If not, it'll just kind of pass you back to home. So that's just a way that you can call environment variables and different things from it doesn't just have to be environment variables. I'm using that as an example, but you can use local JSON files or things like that you have that don't change often, that don't need to be in a database. If you just kind of have some static data in a JSON object that you want to be able to reference in places, you can use configs for that. You can use configs for a lot of stuff, but that's just a couple quick examples. And then here we have our environment variables, and like using the environment variables. So since this uses, it seems that you could reference your environment variables directly without having to use a config file, kind of like I was talking about. At least in Laravel, I've always used the config to get them, because I don't think we just have access to the environment variables like this, but it seems like Adonis does allow you to have access to the environment variables. And I might be misspeaking there, and maybe I'm doing things wrong by calling them with the config files in Laravel, but that's how I've done it. And here it looks like you can just kind of call your environment variables directly in your code here, which is kind of nice. And then you can validate your environment variables as well. Okay, I'm just kind of breezing through this because I'm not really going to be setting up any of this stuff, but you can like validate your schema for your API here. So it does seem like there's a lot of functionality and things that you can do with your environment variables here, and that will be all in that section. I really kind of want to get to authentication. I don't want to just fast forward to that, but I think that that's where I'm headed. I'm just kind of looking through this. So this is going through the folder structure, telling us a little bit about our folder structure for our project, which I kind of went through a little bit and compared it to Laravel because I was making this video to compare the two, and now I'm kind of just trying to dive a little bit deeper into what Adonis does or needs set up right now through these docs. And as you can see, I'm breezing through it because I don't need to reference this stuff right away. And if I was already developing and trying to build something, then I would be coming back to this if I needed to. But I'm just kind of looking through this quickly to just give me an idea of like how it's set up and seeing if anything stands out that I should know about. But, like even the public directory, that's kind of like the same in Laravel. That's where you have your public files, and you can use that as like a storage for like some of your images and things that are public for your application. Kind of common in most projects to have a public file, and then you have your database, and it's kind of just going through all of what I just went through. And it does have a separate types directory since you're using TypeScript. So if you need to create custom types, you can use TypeScript. I do miss TypeScript a lot, and working in Laravel has been fine because I use PHP, and really once you kind of set up a lot of your backend stuff, you're really just doing a lot of front end stuff by getting data from the backend. But I do miss just having TypeScript, and that's why I've been kind of leaning towards using Laravel with Inertia, and weighing out my options to see if I use a different framework that might have some Laravel type feel with just more of the TypeScript that I've been missing. So here we have some steps on deployment, some steps on Docker, and I'm just gonna go through that. And then we have concepts, like their documentation is really, really robust. They have a lot of stuff here, and I'm not gonna go through too much of that because that feels way out of scope for this video. And maybe once I start building with it some more, and I maybe want to keep using it, I'll do more videos on this. But I wanted to see the routes and how the routes go. So it says that the routes are defined inside the start routes. Okay, so in the start here we have our routes. Okay, so then in Laravel, just for comparison's sake, we do have a routes directory. And then in that routes directory, you have an API, a console, and then a web. And web is usually where most of your routes are going to be for your web app. And if you have an API set up, then your routes would be in the API directory. In the Adonis folder structure, it seems like we have a start, and that seems to have our env file, our kernel, and then that's where routes lives. And in that routes file, that's where we define our routes. So I couldn't find that earlier, but that's where it is if you're curious. And let's go back to this real quick. So that's where we do our routes. They also have commands for listing out routes. Laravel has this too, and that's another similarity. The PHP artisan command has a lot of stuff that you can use and help you with to be more productive and get information about your application. And it seems that Adonis is doing something very similar. And I wonder if I just run node ace, if it'll just give me a list of all the commands, which it should, because that's what Laravel does. It's funny, it feels so Laravel-ish. Yeah, so running node ace kind of lists out all the commands that I have here, the dbc. There's just so much that it does feel like Laravel for JavaScript. Again, keep in mind, Laravel's been around for a long time, and Adonis is kind of new. So it's not going to be the same. There's going to be things that I'm sure that if you started building out a really big project and you're used to using Laravel and you're like, I'm going to use this, you're probably going to run into something where you're used to just having a package, whether it be first party or third party in Laravel, that just does something for you that I guarantee you use Adonis, and you're going to run into a case where that doesn't exist. And you're going to be like, damn it, I wish I was using Laravel. But if you were just interested in learning what Laravel kind of feels like, and you wanted to not have to deal with PHP, and you wanted some of that MVC setup, Adonis is feeling like that. I can see why people are like, oh, that's Laravel for JavaScript. And then, some people were like, oh, no, it's not. But having worked in Laravel for the last few months and the better part of this year, I can tell you that this feels a lot like Laravel. I will say that I don't know if I should get more into the weeds of every little bit of the documentation here, because then we would be getting into actually building with this. I just wanted to see what it looked like. Let's just get into the authentication real quick, because that's one of the biggest things. I just wanted to see how quick it was to just set up authentication. I did the basic authentication, and before I end this video, I just want to test that real quick, and I'll probably just spin it up with Inertia to see if the only difference is that the resources views is using Inertia versus the Edge templating language that they have here for the web. But basic auth guard is implemented HTTP authentication framework in the client, choosing a user provider, installation. So in the auth guard with the web and API starter kits, however, you can install and configure it manually inside of your application. And then you can initialize the middleware here. So it seems like right in your HTML, you can kind of do some auth checks, which is something that Laravel offers too, which is super nice. And it looks like you can also just set up middleware to just completely block users that aren't authenticated to not be able to get to certain pages. So it has a lot of that same feel and functionality of the Laravel authentication. But I will say that one thing about Laravel, when you use a starter kit with authentication, it sets up a lot of the login and registration. And I'm kind of seeing if that's here. And for some reason, I'm not seeing that it just offers that. So I'm curious on how that looks. And I don't know. So it's features not supported by the auth package. So the auth package narrowly focuses on authenticating HTTP requests, and following features are outside of its scope. So their auth package does not actually handle any of this stuff. So it doesn't handle the user registration features like the registration form, email verification, account activation. It does not handle account management features like the password recovery and email update, and then assigning roles or verifying permissions. Instead, use Bouncer to implement authorization checks in your application. Okay, so that's kind of a bummer. I will say that one of the things that I love so much about Laravel is that stuff is just part of their Breeze package or part of their Jetstream package. And it doesn't seem like that just comes out of the box as part of the basic auth package here. And I don't think it comes out of the box with any of the auth that Adonis provides. And I would say that I would like to see that. I would say that's one of the biggest things that I love about Laravel is just that stuff just works out of the box and you don't have to set any of that up, because setting up auth is kind of a pain. And even though this does offer, authenticating the HTTP requests and it makes setting up your middleware a little bit easier, you're still kind of left to your own devices, which could, be taken as a good thing by some people. Again, it just goes back to me really enjoying not having to deal with that stuff and having the framework do it for me. And I haven't done a deep enough dive to know if there's third-party packages that will, set up registration forms and all of this other stuff for you. So that might be something that exists, and I just don't know because I'm completely new to Adonis and this framework. But I do feel that that's something that's just missing to make this the Laravel of JavaScript. I wish it gave you the option of having that, and hopefully they'll build that out in the future. And I'm a little bummed to see that it doesn't provide any of that stuff for you out of the box. So after looking at authentication, I will say that that is a bit of a bummer. Real quick, I just want to spin it up with Inertia and just see what that looks like. I'm sure that the only difference is going to be that in the views, you're going to have your framework of choice and you're not going to have your, front end HTML with Edge, and you're going to have Vue or React or whatever you choose. And that's basically what Laravel does. I know that there's other stuff that happens behind the scenes, but that's just one of the key differences when you're building with Blade and Livewire versus building with Inertia and Laravel. And I want to see if that's just going to be like one of the main differences here. I'm guessing it is. So I'm just going to set up basic auth. I'm going to do everything the same. And then here we can choose which one you want to use. And I'm just going to use Vue. It seems like you can also skip it and then set up everything manually. So maybe you could use different frameworks that are compatible and usable with Inertia too, besides just the ones that they give you here. So we'll just go with Vue. Do we want server-side rendering? Let's just say true, and then it's installing. Okay, so that looks like that's set up. I'm going to go ahead and open up VS Code for that Adonis Inertia demo. The main difference that I noticed between Adonis Inertia and Laravel Inertia is that the Adonis Inertia project does create an Inertia directory that seems to have a lot of your files there. And in the Laravel project, what it does is that it actually creates those files and folders for your front-end framework in the JS resources. And I'm sure that there's probably going to be a little bit of overlap there, because I do see here that we still have the resources file. But I will say that everything that is usually in the resources of Laravel, with like the CSS, the views, and the JavaScript, are not there in the Adonis project, but they were when it wasn't using Inertia. You can see that we had the CSS, JavaScript, and views. This is Adonis without Inertia, but Adonis with Inertia just has the views, and it has kind of your main layout page there that's still an Edge file type. But then it has the Inertia directory up here, which I almost like that a little bit better in Laravel with Inertia. It just puts everything in the JavaScript under the resources, which, I mean, it kind of like isolates all your JavaScript stuff to that directory and that folder. But I'm kind of torn. I don't know which one I like better. I almost like having a separate Inertia directory where all of that stuff lives, rather than having it all in like that resources JS, because it does feel like it could get a little messy there, and you have your types here. But not a big difference. I just wanted to see that. And again, I'm sure that there are other things that are going on behind the scenes. That's pretty much it. I really just wanted to do a quick walkthrough of it and kind of compare the two a little bit. I don't want to make this video any longer than it has to because I'm not going to start building something out in Adonis. I really wanted to look at it, compare it, and give my thoughts. And I will say that just from looking at some of the demo code snippets that they had on the Adonis page and looking at the folder structure, there is obviously a huge inspiration that was drawn from Laravel when they created this framework. And I kind of like that. It's missing the authentication UI that is provided in the packages that Laravel has. But, again, that might be something that people appreciate because they want to build out their own UI and they don't want to have the framework handle all of that. But like password resets, email verification, and all of those things are so nice to just have it work in Laravel that might be like the one thing that keeps me on Laravel. Don't want to have to deal with that. So that's just something that really stood out to me because I was kind of bummed when I saw that because I was almost ready to say, maybe I will try out Adonis for a future project because I do miss TypeScript and I kind of miss JavaScript. As crazy as that sounds, I do, because that's just what I've worked in, and PHP is something that's new to me, and I've been adapting and learning more PHP and using it because of Laravel and more because of the framework rather than the language. And it's just personal preference and little things like syntax, and that's usually not a big deal. So if that doesn't bug you and you're a Laravel person and you want to stick with Laravel, by all means do it. Even if you're a JavaScript person and you want to try out Laravel, it's a great framework, and you can still use Inertia on the front end, so you can still have your front end framework and have Laravel handle all the back end stuff and the routing and all of those things that many of us don't want to set up. I don't want to have to deal with that stuff, but I might use Adonis in the future and maybe play around with it a little bit more. It does seem like a neat framework. It's still young. It's still kind of new, and if it gains more adoption and it gains more traction, then it could become something that people use more often. And I just wanted to test it out and check it out and give you my opinion on it while I learned a little bit about it. I hope this video was helpful. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you hit that like button. If there's other frameworks in tech you want me to do videos on like this, let me know. I'm just getting started with Astro. I was going to do my portfolio in Astro. It's something that I've wanted to tinker around with for a while, and I've been reading through a little bit of the getting started, and I've already spun up my portfolio locally, and I've been messing around with it a little bit. So I'm not an expert in it, but I can definitely do a little bit of that in real time and make a video out of it and just kind of talk through it like I am here. And learning in public, I think, is great. I encourage more people to do that because the truth is that developers are always learning. And even if you have a lot of experience, there's a lot of new stuff that comes out. And I've never considered myself an expert in anything, but I've always been very eager to learn. And I want to share that with you guys so that maybe you feel a little bit more comfortable when you have to go learn something new, or you realize that there's going to be a lot of learning involved, and see someone else who's done this for a little while do it. Maybe that just encourages other people to try and be curious and fail and fumble around and then figure stuff out. All right. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.